Hello again, this is Mark Mitchell. We're going to be looking at Chapter 5 today, and just again a brief video to help you with some of the material there if you need it. And this chapter marks the difference from some of the other chapters that we've covered so far in that it covers two faiths in one chapter. And again, we have a few slides, not too many, and it covers just some things that are in the textbook, and there's others in there too as well, other items that are of interest too. And I'll add a little bit that's maybe not with the PowerPoint slides going forward. So we're going to look at Jainism and Sikhism today. So our first slide is really just going to give us some background on the Jainism worldview. We're going to get to that in just a moment or two, but I wanted to start with some other things leading up to that. But the author begins with a story there, and of course he is visiting another part of the world, and he's coming to visit a religious center for the Sikhs, and that's called a Gurdwara. And of course one of the traditional clothing items that Sikhs wear, and sometimes they're mistaken for Muslims, is the turban. And again, have some more to say about that a little bit later. The holy book of the Jains we're also going to mention, and there's a little bit more, of course, later in the textbook. It comes back to that quite a bit with some of the historical detail, but that's the Adi Granth, and that's the holy book. It mentions that there. And then that Sikhs also carry a weapon. It's a ritual knife called a kirpan, and that's really for self-defense. But all of that is mentioned in the introductory part to the chapter. Now we're still looking in terms of location in the world, but India. So it's interesting how many of these religions did happen quite a bit far away from where we live. But both Jainism and Sikhism, Jainism being older and more ancient, and Sikhism being newer, but still in India. And certainly in terms of the number of adherents or people who believe this, it's less than some of the other religions we've seen so far. And both of the ones today in Chapter 5 have some connection back to Hinduism. So they believe in karma and rebirth and reincarnation. And it seems to be a lot of blending going on in these religions. So that's a theme throughout our book too. Now, both religions we're looking at today are in opposition to polytheism and ritualism. So they want to make things in religious terms very simple, and they believe in one God. Now, Jainism rejects a belief in a creator, and it sees the universe as just natural forces coming together. It does recognize the spiritual potential in each person, and it also emphasizes in Buddhism the non-attachment to the world, and of course the ahisma, or the non-harm to all living things, people, animal, insects. Sikhism, on the other hand, emphasizes monotheism, and Jainism again rejects that belief in the creator. But the Sikhs, they meat eaters, and then also practice self-defense, and we'll get into that a little bit later. So they used to practice the non-harm principle, but due to self-defense, they have changed a little bit over their history. But at any rate, back to the Jainism and some of the things there. Now, the Jains, they believe that their religion is very ancient. And we've already talked about how the Vedic religion had come into the worldview, but then there were some people who just had some opposition to it. And Jainism is in that category too. Now, it is unique. Jainism is unique because it does not really seek converts in other lands. And, of course, I already mentioned it's been influenced by Hindu ideas. Nonviolence is the practice, and living a basic, simple, austere type existence. Now, in Jain belief, what they have is the name is the Mahavir, but that is really talking about people who have reached perfection, and in particular, Mahavir means great man or hero, but they trace their origins back to an individual who received this name, and they're not exactly sure when this person lived, but it goes back to about 600 BCE. And all total, they have about 24 great people that they refer to. And again, they're not sure of the existence of these people, but they're just held to be up as role models for people practicing Jainism today. Now, the 24 great people are called the Tirthankara, and these are basically the role models or guides that show the way of how to live based on Jainism to others. Now, that word, Tirthankara, means a crossing marker or ford finder, and I think there's a slide near the end that brings that vocabulary term up, and of course you can also use some of the activities in blackboards to practice with the terms as well as the book. Okay, but again, going through these 24 people, and that, of course, they lived quite a bit of time ago. Now, the founder, the first great person, again, who gets that title of Mahavir, the great man, was born somewhere about 600 BCE. There's a little dispute over it, but he was born into a pretty wealthy family. He was the second son, and he had fewer responsibilities than caring for his older parents than his older brother did. So the legend is that some think he didn't marry, while others think that he was married and had a child. But like the Buddha, he left home somewhere around 30 to live the life of a wandering holy man. And he at first also practiced extreme asceticism. So he's going to live on the smallest amount of food and water and clothing that he can. He was very, very harsh towards himself and took very little from others. When he renounced the world, trying to follow this process of detachment, he pulled out his own hair. And so he received a lot of taunting by others. When he would meditate, they would kind of harass him and do something to harm him, either try to burn him or put sharp objects in his skin. He was attacked by dogs, but his response was not to resist. So his clothing was very simple, just a loincloth. That was it. And then after he lost it, he went around naked the rest of his life. So he had to beg for food as he wandered along and had no clothes. So he was a very gentle person. He avoided injuring any living thing. And he would take this to the extreme that when he drank a liquid, he would strain it so as not to drink and swallow an insect. Didn't want to kill an insect that might have fallen into his cup. And when he would walk very carefully as to make sure he was not killing an ant or some other insect while traveling. So imagine how difficult that would be to observe those things in life, just time-consuming and things like that. Now, finally, after 12 years of meditation, he finally had a great liberation. But he felt that his ties to the ordinary world were conquered. So he no longer felt troubled by pain, suffering, shame, or loss. So that was his goal, is to not be bound to this world. Now, after doing this, he really got the title, or people called him a conqueror or a Jina. And this is how Jainism as a religion takes its name. So it is why he is the first of the 24 great people that I've been talking about for a second here. And then after this, he spent about the next 30 years of his life trying to teach his doctrines as he wandered around and organizing an order of monks that would follow his teachings. And again, they were not wearing clothes. And then he died somewhere in northeastern India around the age of 72. All right, so that was just a little bit of background, and now we pick up more with the slide. But the worldview of Jainism, the first thing mentioned that's on the PowerPoint, I've already said, but it is a significant point that we really haven't seen before. But they would reject a belief in a creator God. Now, a long Jain poem known as the Mahapurana, and that goes back to about the 9th century before of the BCE, but it would follow up on this thought, and what was written down was that only foolish men declare that a creator made the world. In other places, it would say the world was created. Just for someone to say that the world was created by a creator is ill-advised and should be rejected. It's a mistake to think that way, and anybody who does is mistaken. Now, you might think, well, how did they come to that conclusion? But this is the mindset. They would think, for example, if there was a creator and the creator is perfect, then why did God create a universe that is imperfect? If God made the universe because of love, then why is it so full of suffering beings? And if the universe had to be created, why did God also need to be created? So lots of questions like this is really where they get that idea from. So again, you can maybe think of some other questions that people have today that may be a little bit different, but still, things like this people have thought about for a long, long time. All right, but they would also argue that the universe is eternal, again on the slide, and that it is constantly changing as well. So we definitely have seen that constant change before. So again, Jainists would believe that the regular great cycles of rising and falling are on display in the world and the universe. Now, the 24 role models, or the Tirthankara, are supposed to be able to help Jainists along the way. These role models help point the way of how to live and get past all these problems that Jainists believe are out there. Now, here's another word that we'll see here and at the end of the slides, but halozoism is mentioned, but is the idea here from the Greek that matter is alive. So this is the belief, kind of similar to animism, that everything is full of life and there is capable of suffering. And this is probably something that, again, is very ancient. We see, for example, in Jain philosophy, it has a dualistic nature, meaning that there are really two types of matter. There's the physical side, or the matter side, which is not alive and has no consciousness. And then there's the spirit side, which senses and feels. So, when the Jainists are out and about, they see consciousness in everything. So, water, rocks, fire, where other people do not think that is so. There are two terms that the Jainists use. One is called jiva. Now, that's pertaining more to the soul or spirit life. And then ahiva is talking more about the matter and the non-soul and the non-life. So Jainism, this leads to their seeing the world and also human beings as composed of two parts, the material side and the spiritual side. Okay, let's click on to the next one. There, just really mentioned that, but karma and reincarnation are also part of the Jain beliefs that might be expected. We've kind of encountered those before from both Hinduism and Buddhism. Now, they would believe that karma really has kind of a physical quality like a powder. And this karma, in essence, would kind of settle on and cling to the spirit. Now, the level of rebirth is determined according to the karma you have at the time of your death. Now, these superhuman beings, they exist in realms above the earth. All right, so now the great goal overall for Jainists in life is to reach a state of total freedom. And those that have done that, these liberated spirits, now liberated meaning they're no longer in their physical form, but they live on the highest realm, which is thought to be at the very top of the universe. The Mahavir and other Tirthankaras, they dwell there, but not allowed to help human beings. All right, interesting kind of thought in there, and their beliefs, and their worldview. Okay, so when we move over to the Jain ethics, there are 5 ethical recommendations, and they're listed here on the next slide. We've mentioned one, The ahisma is the idea of nonviolence. It can be translated as gentleness or harmlessness, and it is the very basic foundation of Jain ethics. So I mentioned in the first of the Tirthankaras of how the Mahavir lived his life and was very taken aback with not causing harm to insects, either in his drink or walking. They take this even further in their diet, but usually the Jainists are strict vegetarians. They reject the use of animal products. They're not going to hunt or fish. They're not going to slaughter animals. They're not going to farm because, hey, they could hurt animals or insects that are living in the fields. So they're going to choose occupations and lifestyles that do not harm at all, such as medicine, education, law, or business. The second ethical recommendation is non-lying. So they would be very strict in not telling any falsehood. They would take this to the extreme of, hey, don't even exaggerate, even when you mean it in a humorous way. But these things, lying and exaggeration, can cause hurt. The goal that Jainism wants to keep is absolute truth in what they do, but that is impossible to find or sometimes to express. The third ethical recommendation is non-stealing. So the idea here is not to take from others what is not given. And if you did that, then that could cause pain to others. And then, if you do steal, then there are some improper desires and motives that are causing pain to others. So that would conflict with their ethical system. Chastity is the fourth. And again, this is for monks and nuns. This would mean complete celibacy. If one is already married, it means being faithful to your spouse. Now, the Mahavir thought that sex itself was a danger to liberation because it binds you to this world. It gives you interest in the world that can later cause problems for most people. And finally, non-attachment. The Jains believe that all attachments, whether it's home, family, territory, clothes, money, possessions, whatever it is, they kind of come with a weight. And that weight binds you to the world, and it can take complete control over you in some cases. So the non-attachment means, for example, not having all these attachments that we mentioned. It means being generous and giving away and limiting our possessions only to the extent of you keep and retain what is necessary. So we have a history, again, of these role models in Jainism who are doing that very thing. All right, we'll move on to the next slide and again see some of the key terms that we have already mentioned today, and take advantage of Blackboard where we have those terms listed in the Quizlet where you can practice and really get really familiar with some of these that you might see on the quiz or the exam coming up. All right, the only one we didn't mention, I think, here on the PowerPoint slides is the last one. And the last one here is really talking about how the Jains see death. Now, what happens there is Jainism is going to defend a person's right to end their own life. We've had some cases in the United States where that very issue has gone to court, but this would not really be a problem in lands that follow Jainism. Now, when we go back to the Mahavir, his parents, it is reported that they died by self-starvation, and that's what the Salakana is. It's death by self-starvation. And this is considered the most esteemed way to end one's life. And the way it happens is most Jains, they practice fasting for over years. They get used to taking less and less food for periods of times. And then when one gets old and weak, they just eat less and less to bring about their death. And this is not seen as bad or pessimistic. It's seen as a noble, ultimate expression of non-attachment and freedom in the world to accomplish your final goal. So when you stop eating food and only take drink, that's really one of the processes that goes on. It takes somewhere about close to a month for a person to actually die. Now, Jains, they see life as a preparation for the liberation of the spirit. That was the jiva we talked about earlier from the body. And then pass on to the next level of existence. Okay, so it's not a sad time. It's actually a good time, happy time. It's what they've been looking forward to. And if they don't stop eating, death by starvation, some other alternatives are to walk into an ocean or lake. So when you're discussing suicide with Jains, now you kind of have to be careful because they view it differently, I think, than the Western notion of what we do. That's a very interesting concept that they have. Now, with all religions, there are different branches. So, again, no matter the religion that you can come up with, there are just different groups who have a little bit different beliefs. And we have 4 up here, and just make a few comments about them. But the first one is the Digamber, and the Digamber can be translated as atmosphere clad or clothed in the sky. So that is just simply a nice way to refer to monks being naked. So everything in this really conservative school is going to be renounced down to the last piece of clothing. So that really indicates their name quite well. So again, they're located somewhere in about southern India, and they formed their branch because they thought a lot of the other followers of Jainism were just really not serious about it. They didn't take it to the right level, and so they decided to get back to what they thought was the roots of their religion. So they don't accept women to become monks, and they can only become monks when in a next life they were reborn as men instead, and they are very high on celibacy as well. The second branch of Jainism on the slides is the Set Ambara, and that means clothed in white. So the monks and nuns who observe this form of Jainism, they're going to dress in white robes. So that means that they do accept women. So they're more in the northern part of India, and they have a few different views about the Mahavir that maybe the other branches would disagree with. Now, they're also located in the western part of India, but now they do believe that the Mahavir was buried, and so they would not be as strict about the celibacy as the first branch of Jainism that we looked at. The Stanik Vasis means really simple building. This is a fairly new branch, and by fairly new, I mean basically the last 200 years, and they are basically a reform movement. And what that means is they think that the other branches have got it wrong, and that they want to fix the problems that have occurred. So lots of reform movements in different religions and faiths around the world. Now, they avoid the uses of images and temples. And one of the devotional rituals that is used by this branch is the puja. Puja, and they also focus on meditation and then living that life of austerity. The final branch is the Terapanthes, and that is a word that means 13, and it again is a reform movement. It's even newer than the third branch here on the PowerPoint slide, and its founder goes back to the early 1700s, and he gets the title of Swami. So again, a great leader is really what that's meant to indicate. Now, this branch of Jainism rejects the use of images as well, and what they have done that was a little bit different from the others is they have a hierarchical structure of power, and so there's a supreme guru, the Akira, at the top who oversees everything that kind of goes on. So one other major difference is they are active in spreading their faith, so as compared to the other branches. Okay, and just a few other things I want to mention before we head off into Sikhism. Again, I don't have a lot of the PowerPoint slides, and that's why I'm adding a little bit more as we go along. The chapters are sometimes a little long, and I wanted to help just a little bit. let's talk with a moment or so about the Jain practices, what a follower of Jainism actually does. And they do not, again, believe in a creator God, so they would not stress devotional acts directed either to gods or their deceased relatives or leaders for help. We've seen that before in some of the indigenous or native religions. And that's where the puja or devotional ritual maybe comes in. Now, that would take place in front of altars, in front of statues, but it's not directed toward a particular god or anything of that nature. Now, the puja involves offering of food, incense, from oil lamps, the flames that come from there, and flowers. Already mentioned that Jains, they practice fasting, and the monks and nuns do that more strictly than, say, lay people who are not in monasteries. Usually the fasting lasts somewhere about 15 days in a calendar year. And then the end of their year, it ends with a confession of wrongdoing and a plea for pardon of these wrongdoings. And then pilgrimages are also common in Jain practice. Now, the scriptures that the Jains use are called the purvas, and they no longer exist in their entirety, but there's different parts to them. There's about 3 parts. And again, some of the different branches that we talked about, they would have disagreements over what is considered to be authoritative, real scripture versus scripture that is not seen as going to be authentic. All right, so those are a few other things I wanted to add there as we move on to our second part, and that is looking more at Sikhism. And really, this is a little bit shorter than what we've looked at for the first part. Okay, so when we start out, we really want to look, before we get to the development of Sikhism, is really about its founder. So the founder is Nanak, and he was born somewhere before 1500. He is considered the founder of Sikhism. Now, he was born in what today we know in as Pakistan, and he grew up in a Hindu family. So that's important in terms of what's going to happen a little bit later. Now, he eventually married, and he had a couple of children. He was a man who had several jobs. So, for example, he was a herder, he was a clerical assistant, but it seems like he was always pretty much interested in religion. Now, he had a friend named Mardana, and Mardana was a follower of Islam, and they would meet together in the evenings, and they would discuss religious ideas, and they would sing hymns together. Now, one night, Nanak, he had an experience so powerful that he considered it to be a revelation. So he was bathing, and then he went into the forest. He stayed there for 3 days, and then he felt like God or the divine presence had entered into his body. Now, later on, he would say he had experienced God directly, but what was revealed to him was that there was only one God, and it was beyond human conception and beyond human name. So the name that they settled on was the true name. That was the name for God, true name. Now, again, the divine was really beyond all human conception. And then also, Nanak began to believe that Hindus and Muslims worship the same God, and that really having different religions with different beliefs was a mistake. And so he spent the most of his life trying to break down some of those differences between the two religions or any other religions. Now, this experience that Nanak had, what our author of the book would say is this is not really different. This is not new. It happens with Isaiah under Judaism. It happens with Zarathustra and Muhammad. But they all have these revelations about what's considered to be God. After this, he shared this information with his friend Mardana, and they decided to leave together, and they became wandering holy men too, and they wandered around throughout India. So they were homeless, and what they would do is preach while his friend would play instruments, and they sought to make disciples. And that's where the word Sikh comes from. Sikh means disciple. Now, Nanak would try to blend Hinduism and Islam together to be appealing to those he came into contact with. So some of his dress would be Hindu, or some of his face paintings would be Hindu in nature, and then he would wear also a Muslim coat or a Muslim cap. Again, he believes that with his revelation, this is what he should be doing. Now, they kept doing this for a long period of time, and Mardana finally died in his 60s. And then finally, after that, Nanak died as well in somewhere around 1539. But he is considered the first in a line of 10 Sikh gurus or spiritual teachers. Now, one of the next items I wanted to mention there is the worldview and teachings of Nanak. And so he saw Sikhism really as a brand new religion. And he, after his revelation, rejected both Hinduism and Islam. But he thought, again, that what he was doing with Sikhism was an entirely new religion in total. So he did accept reincarnation and karma, but he resisted the Hindu idea of polytheism and the elaborate rituals that go on there too. Now he thought, Nanak, that is, that he was God's mouthpiece, and that God dwells within each individual, and each person can come into contact with God. He also criticized Hinduism and Islam for just not being compassionate towards the poor. All right, and that leads us up to our first slide here, but there is a process that goes by that I think our slide has an excellent point, but at first, that Sikhism is not really a true religion, but a movement, and then it later defines itself and it actually tries to establish itself as really of a religion, and that takes quite a bit of time. It's not as quickly as maybe our slides present. Now, remember, there's a line of 10 gurus all total, and the Adi Granth, that's the the book of scriptures that is used by the Sikhs, that is considered the 10th and current and last of the gurus. The others are actually people who lived and died. So, now again, the earliest stage of trying to make Sikhism a religion was done through the first four, and our book does have quite a bit of detail about this process. Now, in the next stage, really what happened is Sikhism had been attacked, and a lot of these were encounters with followers of Islam, and then they took a defensive stance. So remember that opening story where there's the man with the special knife? That was part of the defensive stance. Now, they also, for example, developed a sacred book, a sacred city where their religion was based, and then they clearly defined their religious practices and beliefs, and we've talked about some of those. And then finally, the third stage, where it really helps Sikhism to become a religion, is it's able to move beyond its original borders and then try to make converts. The headquarters is really about in northern India. And then a little bit about the Adi Granth, the book, the holy book that is used by the Jainists, has a lot of information, a lot of the hymns, for example, that were written by gurus and saints, and then it also has a lot of information about what type of things should be done, how to solve problems in life, and giving commentary where it is needed. Now, Nanak is actually responsible for writing a great part of it. There are 39 rags or tunes that are in the book. It's divided into 3 parts. That first is considered the most important and has the poem and the summary of the religion. The second part has the 39 rags or tunes that I mentioned, and then the third part has a lot of other works like poems and hymns from not only Sikh tradition, Sikh gurus and saints, but also from Hinduism and Islam faith as well. Now, a lot of the gurus, what happened is before this defensive posture was taken, is they were basically killed. They were killed early, and then the ninth guru, before he could name a successor, now his 4 sons preceded him in death, and that's when he established the Adi Granth, their holy book, as the successor and final permanent guru. So there's no 11th or more guru out there. All right, so now the Sikh, some of their beliefs and practices. We mentioned about the true name already, the karma and reincarnation, the dual nature, a body and spirit, the holy book of the Adi Granth, and then the line of the 10 gurus. Now, they are mentioned a little more specifically in the book, so make sure you kind of read a little bit of that, and you'll get an idea some more specifically of what each one did. There's not a lot there, but it just simply gives us a little historical account of what they did to further the religion. I think that's really why they're in there. Now, one of the last things on our slides, at least, talks about Sikhs and the Khalsa. And the Khalsa just really is a more of a community than anything else. And here in this community, they list 5 Ks. They all begin with the letter K, so that sounds like a reasonable thing to do. But it really kind of gives us some physical description of what goes on in terms of their dress. There's 5 things that they do. The kesh, the uncut hair and beard. Now, the reason they do that is they believe they don't cut their hair, and they do this to honor the perfection of the person as the handiwork of God. Okay, so they usually do that and keep their hair kind of covered under a covering. The second practice is the hair comb, and that is to hold the uncut hair in place, the kangla, and then the kuch is the special underdressing to indicate alertness and readiness to fight at a given moment. Again, maybe some of the defensive nature that the Sikhs got used to because of some of the persecution that happened earlier. The kurban is the sword for defense, that knife or dagger that they keep at the side. It looks kind of imposing. And then the kara is a bracelet of iron or steel that symbolizes strength. The author actually encounters a Sikh, and the Sikh is proud of his kara and actually shows the author what it's about. Now, I have come into contact before with a Sikh. It was a very interesting lecture that he gave, but he was commenting how a lot of times is that Sikhs were confused with followers of Islam because of their dress, and so that related a little bit to this slide. But one other distinctive type of dress that Sikhs use is, of course, the turban. And our book briefly has an article on that. You know, why is it that you would wear a turban? And a very good answer is that, well, hey, you use it for protection from the sun and the rain. And so for those who work outside, who are exposed to it, that is precisely one of the benefits of having a turban. The turban can vary in its color. Different colors may denote something about the prestige of the owner of the turban. The size of the turban may indicate different levels of authority, but it's non-mandatory, so you're not required to wear it. You can do that. Now, if you're a male, that's exactly what you would wear, but if you're a female, you would not wear a turban. You would wear a veil instead. Okay, so I think this is good enough just to give you some idea. I think our chapter was a little bit longer for Jainism than it was Sikhism, but hopefully this will help you with some of the material. Again, these chapters are kind of long, but they're interesting with a lot of detail as we continue our journey of world religions across the globe. So thank you. I hope you have a good day, and contact me if I can help you.